For over a decade, I have started every single morning the exact same way. Before coffee, before food, before anything else touches my lips. 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar in a glass of water. Every morning, without fail, for 10 plus years straight. And for most of that time, I could not fully explain why I kept doing it. I just knew something was working. Something felt different. My mornings felt more controlled. My cravings throughout the day felt quieter. My fasting window felt significantly easier to maintain without constantly fighting hunger. But every time I tried to explain this to someone, I got the same reaction. That slow nod, that polite smile, that look that says, "Sure, buddy, magic vinegar." And honestly, I understood the skepticism completely. The apple cider vinegar conversation has been an absolute mess for years. Truly, one side called it witch doctor science. Pseudoscientific nonsense dressed up in wellness clothing and sold to desperate people. That was one camp. The other camp was claiming it melted fat directly off your body like some kind of biological miracle. Drink vinegar, lose weight. Simple as that. Neither of those was right, and the real truth turned out to be far more interesting than either extreme ever suggested. So, I kept using it. I kept observing what it was doing. And I kept waiting patiently for the science to catch up to what I was already experiencing firsthand. It finally has. And what the research is now showing goes much deeper than anyone in the apple cider vinegar conversation has been talking about. Before I get into the actual study, I need to clear something up first, because I think this is where most people completely misunderstand what apple cider vinegar is doing. This is not primarily a blood sugar story. That framing has dominated the conversation forever, and it has actually held back the real understanding of what is happening here. Yes, apple cider vinegar has been shown to blunt blood sugar spikes after meals. That part is documented and real. Nobody is disputing that finding. But if blood sugar modulation were the whole story, you could achieve a similar result by simply eating more slowly, or taking a short 10-minute walk after your meal. The glucose angle, while genuinely valid, never fully explained the magnitude of what people kept reporting. The dramatically reduced appetite, the quieter cravings, the overall drop in food intake. Something else was going on underneath all of that. Something operating at a deeper biological level that the blood sugar explanation simply could not account for. The answer begins with a molecule that most people have never heard of. And once you understand what this molecule does, everything changes. When you consume apple cider vinegar, your body does not simply absorb it and move on. It breaks apart in a process called dissociation and converts into something called acetate. Now, most people hear the word acetate and think nothing of it. It sounds like a chemistry term. It sounds unimportant. It is anything but unimportant. Acetate is biologically active in ways that researchers are only now beginning to fully understand and document. It is not a passive byproduct. It is a signaling molecule. And the research that is coming out right now around acetate is genuinely one of the most exciting things happening in metabolic and appetite science. I am not overstating that. A study was recently published in Gastroenterology, which is one of the most respected and rigorous journals in digestive and metabolic research. This study changed how I think about everything. The researchers looked at what happens at the genetic and enzymatic level when the human body processes sugar. They designed the study with 2 separate arms. One involved rodents, the other involved humans. What they discovered in both arms of that study was something that completely reframes the entire apple cider vinegar conversation from the ground up. There is a gene variant that exists in roughly 15% of the human population. This gene variant affects how the body responds after consuming sugar. The response is remarkable. In individuals who carry this gene variant, or in rodents where this gene is knocked out entirely, something specific happens after eating sugar. Their bodies produce significantly elevated levels of acetate, and those elevated acetate levels appear to function as the body's own built-in biological signal to stop eating sugar. It is like an internal off switch. Think about what that means in real terms. These are people whose bodies respond to sugar by immediately producing the very compound that suppresses the drive to consume more sugar. It is a natural biological brake system. And the people who have this gene variant, they tend to consume meaningfully less sugar overall. Not because of stronger willpower, not because of better discipline or better habits or better character. Their biochemistry is simply operating differently underneath the surface. The craving never fully materializes. So the obvious and immediate question becomes this: what about the other 85% of people? The vast majority who do not carry this gene variant. What happens in their bodies when they eat sugar? Do they have any version of this brake system available to them? Or are they just stuck in the loop? This is exactly where apple cider vinegar stops being a folk remedy and starts being something backed by genuinely compelling science. Stay with me here. If acetate is the molecule that signals your brain to stop craving sugar, and apple cider vinegar is one of the most concentrated and bioavailable sources of acetate you can consume, then the logic follows clearly. Taking apple cider vinegar in the morning is essentially giving your body a head start on that same internal brake system. You are not waiting for the sugar to trigger the acetate response. You are putting acetate into the system proactively, before the cravings even begin, before breakfast, before the day has a chance to pull you toward poor choices. You do not need the gene variant to benefit from this. You can supply the acetate directly through what you consume. That is a genuinely powerful concept. And the research supports this at a mechanistic level. Studies with rodent models have shown that when pure acetate is administered directly, it virtually abolishes sugar-seeking behavior in those animals. The animals consume dramatically less sugar, not because the sugar was restricted, not because it was made unavailable to them. The drive to seek it simply disappeared. The craving itself was gone. And that distinction matters enormously. This is not about restriction. This is about biological signaling changing the internal experience of wanting. Now, I know what some people are thinking. Rodent studies, mouse models. How does any of this actually translate to what is happening inside a human body? That is a fair and reasonable question. But this is not a single isolated rodent finding. The mechanistic pathway has been traced and confirmed in human research as well. And it connects directly to two biological systems that are very much worth understanding in detail, because these two systems touch everything when it comes to appetite, cravings, and overall food intake. Here is where the science gets genuinely deeper and more exciting than almost anything I have talked about before. This part needs your full attention. Research published in Nature Communications found something striking about acetate that most people in the health space are not yet talking about. Acetate does not just stay in your gut. It does not just circulate in your bloodstream and get metabolized like a typical nutrient. Acetate actually crosses the blood-brain barrier. It physically enters the brain itself, and once it is inside the brain, it directly influences the GABAergic system. If you are not familiar with that term, let me explain it simply because it matters a great deal here. GABA is your brain's primary calming neurotransmitter. Think of it as the biological equivalent of a dimmer switch for your entire nervous system. Anxiety, stress, mental noise. GABA turns it down. When GABA activity increases in the brain, you feel calmer, more settled, less reactive to stress, less emotionally volatile, less likely to reach for food when you are overwhelmed. That last part is critical because a significant amount of overeating and sugar craving is not truly about hunger. It is about stress. It is about emotional regulation. It is about the brain seeking comfort. When GABA is supported, that stress-driven eating impulse gets quieter. The emotional pull toward food as a coping mechanism weakens. Your relationship with food starts to shift neurologically. But the connection goes even further than that. Because GABA and GLP-1 are closely and directly interconnected inside the brain. And GLP-1 is something you absolutely need to understand right now. GLP-1 stands for glucagon, like peptide 1. It is the hormone that medications like Ozempic and Wegovy are specifically engineered to mimic. It is the biological appetite suppression signal your body is supposed to produce naturally. GLP-1 tells you that you have had enough food. It slows down how quickly your stomach empties. It reduces hunger signaling traveling from your gut to your brain. It creates genuine satiety. The problem is that many people on heavily processed high-sugar diets are not generating adequate GLP-1 responses naturally. The system has become blunted. The signal is too weak to stop the eating. So the full chain of events looks like this when you consume apple cider vinegar in the morning. Apple cider vinegar converts to acetate. Acetate crosses the blood-brain barrier. It activates GABA. GABA then stimulates GLP-1 release. GLP-1 reduces appetite and suppresses sugar cravings. And you move through your morning with significantly less biological pull toward food and sugar. This is not a stretch of logic. This is not cherry-picked science assembled to support a predetermined conclusion. This is a mechanistic pathway with peer-reviewed support across multiple independent journals. And it explains with actual documented biology why so many people for so many years have reported that their mornings feel easier, their cravings quiet down, and their overall food intake naturally drops. Now I want to go back to the gastroenterology study because there was a secondary finding in that research that I think deserves its own moment entirely. This one genuinely surprised me. The researchers found that in the mice without the gene variant, the ones whose bodies did not naturally produce acetate surges after eating sugar, something else was also happening simultaneously. When those mice consumed sugar, they experienced a significantly weaker GLP-1 response compared to the mice that did have the gene variant. Dramatically weaker. Barely a response at all. Think carefully about what that means in practical terms. These mice ate sugar. They got the dopamine activation, they got the blood sugar spike, but they did not get the satiety signal. There was no internal message saying that is enough, we are done, the appetite is satisfied. The biological conversation that should follow sugar consumption was essentially missing from their experience. So they were neurobiologically set up to keep eating. Not because they were weak, not because they lacked self-control, because the feedback loop that was supposed to close simply never closed. Does that pattern sound familiar to you? Because it should. Because that is exactly what millions of people describe when they talk about their relationship with sugar and processed food. You eat some. You want more. You eat more. You still want more. The fullness never quite arrives. The satisfaction never quite lands. You keep going past the point you intended. It has been framed for decades as a willpower problem, a discipline problem, a character problem. The research is telling us clearly it is a biological signaling problem for a significant portion of people. For those people, the very thing they are eating is failing to trigger the signal that is supposed to tell them to stop. The food is not completing the biological conversation. It is leaving it open. And consuming apple cider vinegar, driving up acetate levels before that process begins, may be one of the most accessible and practical ways to reinsert that missing signal back into the loop, to give your body the GLP-1 stimulation that the food itself is failing to provide, to close the loop that sugar and processed food are keeping artificially open. That is what this research is pointing toward. Now, there is one more layer here that the gastroenterology study points to, and I think this might be the most practically useful finding in this entire conversation. Pay attention to this part. When you reduce your sugar intake, regardless of how you get there, your body begins to downregulate the enzyme that is responsible for driving sugar cravings in the first place. It is a self-reinforcing cycle, but this time it is working in your favor instead of against you. Less sugar consumed leads to lower enzyme activity. Lower enzyme activity produces fewer cravings. Fewer cravings lead to even less sugar consumed, which leads to even lower enzyme activity. The cycle compounds over time. The biology begins working with you instead of against you. This is also connected to something called the AMP pathway. AMP is an energy-sensing cellular mechanism that acetate appears to directly activate when present in sufficient concentrations in the body. When AMP is upregulated, your body shifts into a metabolic state that favors fat utilization. It behaves somewhat like your body is in a mild caloric deficit even when intake has not dramatically changed. This is consistent with what people consistently report when using apple cider vinegar over extended periods. Gradual and sustainable shifts in body composition that cannot be explained by calorie counting alone. The biology beneath the surface is shifting. The metabolic state is changing. The appetite signals are recalibrating. All from a simple, inexpensive, daily habit that takes about 30 seconds to do. Let me bring this completely out of the research world and into something you can actually use and apply starting tomorrow morning. This is the practical translation of everything we have covered. 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar diluted in a glass of water first thing in the morning is not a magic solution. Nobody serious is making that claim. But it is mechanistically sound. It drives up acetate in your body at exactly the time of day when cravings tend to establish the tone for everything that follows. It is a front-loading strategy for your biology. It potentially stimulates a natural GLP-1 response that promotes genuine satiety before hunger even has a chance to build momentum and take over your decision-making for the rest of the day. It supports GABA activity in the brain, which directly reduces the stress-driven and emotion-driven eating patterns that derail most people not because of hunger, but because of mental state. It begins activating that self-reinforcing cycle where reduced cravings lead to reduced sugar intake, which leads to further reduced cravings over days and weeks of consistent use. And it places your metabolism into a mild AMP-activated state that gently favors fat utilization throughout the morning without requiring any dramatic dietary changes to achieve that shift. You can also source acetate from other foods. Fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkraut contain it. Kombucha contains it. Whole foods like eggs and dairy contribute to acetate production in the body. But when you are looking for a concentrated, fast, practical, and affordable source of acetate that you can use consistently without significant lifestyle disruption, apple cider vinegar sits at the very top of that list. Here is the broader picture that I think is worth acknowledging, especially right now given the cultural moment we are living in with medications like Ozempic dominating the conversation around appetite and weight. The rise of GLP-1 medications has actually done something genuinely valuable for science, even if the medications themselves are not accessible or appropriate for everyone. They forced a serious conversation. They forced the scientific community to deeply examine the GLP-1 pathway in a way that had never been done before. And in doing so, they opened the door to understanding how other compounds interact with that system. Natural compounds. Inexpensive compounds. Compounds that have been sitting in people's kitchens for generations, quietly doing something that nobody had the scientific framework to fully explain yet. Acetate is one of those compounds. And apple cider vinegar is simply one of the most practical and accessible ways to get meaningful amounts of it into your body on a consistent daily basis. I want to be clear about something important before I close this out. I am not suggesting anyone bypass their doctor's guidance. I am not suggesting this replaces medication for those who genuinely need it. What I am saying is that the morning habit I kept quietly for over a decade, the one that got dismissed, the one that earned me that polite, skeptical smile from so many people, was not nothing. It was never nothing. It was something real, operating through a pathway that the science simply had not caught up to yet. But the science is catching up now. Fast. The gene variant research, the acetate and GLP-1 connection, the GABA pathway, the AMP activation, the self-reinforcing craving suppression cycle, this is a complete and documented biological picture now. It is not one study in isolation. It is a converging body of research across multiple journals pointing consistently in the same direction. Acetate matters. And apple cider vinegar delivers it efficiently. So yes, I will keep doing what I have been doing every morning for the past 10 plus years. 2 tablespoons, glass of water, done in 30 seconds, quiet and consistent. And if someone raises an eyebrow and gives me that look, I will not get defensive anymore. I will not scramble to explain myself or apologize for the habit. I will just smile, because now I know exactly what is happening inside my body when I do it. And the science backs every single part of it. That is all I ever needed.